I'm Chaplain Jacob Scott of the Oregon National Guard. This is the Hope in the Trenches podcast. Where going forward, I'll sit down for conversations with people who offer interesting and informative perspectives on finding strength for life and work in the trenches, and even improving our spiritual posture. Whether you feel like you're under heavy bombardment or ready to go over the top toward a new objective, it's good to be with you. Our guest today is retired Major General John Gronski. General Gronski is a proven combat leader with over 40 years service to the United States Army, including active duty and the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. He commanded units from the company through the division level. Some of his significant assignments included serving as the Deputy Commanding General of U.S. Army Europe when he retired in 2019. He was the Commanding General of the 28th Infantry Division, and he served 2 brigade commands there. He was the Brigade Commander for the 2nd Brigade 28th ID in Ramadi, Iraq in 2005-2006, where he led 5,000 soldiers and Marines in combat operations. He also commanded the 55th Brigade 28th ID and served as Military Liaison Team Chief in Lithuania. General Gronski is a graduate of numerous military schools to include the U.S. Army War College, the Command and General Staff Course, Infantry Officer Advanced Course, Army Ranger School, and Airborne School, and he received numerous military awards and decorations throughout his career. In the private sector, General Gronski worked for many years at a family business, Paul Gronski Enterprises Incorporated, and then worked as a management consultant for approximately 13 years, where he led implementation teams for Fortune 500 companies in the telecommunications, healthcare, and utility industries. General Gronski is a graduate of the University of Scranton in Pennsylvania, where he earned a bachelor's degree in human services. He earned an MBA from Penn State and a master's in strategic studies from the Army War College. He also attended Alvernia University as a doctoral student in the corporate leadership program. He's been certified as a project management professional, and he holds a master's certificate as a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt from Villanova University. General Gronski was raised by his father, who was a single parent. General Gronski was the youngest of 7 children. His father, in the family business we mentioned earlier, when he returned from World War II, opened a garage and a used car business. He's the one who General Gronski credits as teaching him the entrepreneurial mindset. General Gronski is a thoughtful leader, and he has a reputation as a servant leader. He's written 2 books, The Ride of Our Lives, which chronicled a cross-country bicycle trip he, his wife, and their infant son took in 1983, and Iron-Sharpened Leadership, Transforming Hard-Fought Lessons into Action, recently published just last year. He and his wife, Bertie, still live in Pennsylvania. Sir, thanks so much for joining us today on Hope in the Trenches.
At first, I just want to thank you for having me as a guest on your podcast. I really appreciate it. And I think it's important to get a message of hope and faith and various models of leadership out there. So thank you for this. So at any rate, background, got my commission in 1978, served on active duty for a few years, ended up bicycling across the United States with my wife and our 15-month-old son back in 1983 on our way back to northeastern Pennsylvania from the Fort Lewis, Washington area. That's where I left active duty. And joined the Pennsylvania National Guard when I got back to Pennsylvania, and ended up serving a total of over 40 years, between active duty, National Guard, deployments, that type of thing. So I did retire in 2019. But since I was a Pennsylvania National Guardsman, and for most of my military career in the Pennsylvania National Guard, I was a traditional guardsman. I did have a full-time civilian job as well, and a lot of that time period before I went on full-time as a guardsman in 2011 was spent working at a management consulting firm outside of the Philadelphia area, where I worked with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, telecommunications, healthcare, utilities, helping to implement large, complex projects. So not only have the leadership experience on the military side, but also leadership experience on the business side. So when I retired in 2019, my last assignment was one of the DC. Just trying to get out there and help to develop stronger leaders, whether it's aspiring leaders or currently serving leaders. Do a lot of work for Fortune 500 type companies. Also do a lot of leadership training for law enforcement and the military. So that's what I do now, Chaplain.
No, that's fantastic, sir. Well, and I often share with our soldiers and airmen that there is quite often what makes us better at our military professions makes us better in our civilian professions, and vice versa. There's that great scene from the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young, where with the young lieutenant awaiting the birth of his first child, sitting in the chapel, and he asked then Lieutenant Colonel Moore, at least in the movie version, how do you balance those both? And he said, what makes me successful in one makes me successful in the other. And I think you've shown that. How do you find that interplay or that balance?
Yeah, as a National Guardsman, with the family and a full-time, civilian job and career, and various volunteer activities I was involved with, what I found is you can't just divide every one of those elements of your life up equally. So if there's 4 major elements of your life, it can't be 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. It's got to be, you have to adjust it based on what is actually happening. So sometimes, as a National Guardsman, I had to focus on my military responsibilities 90%, and the other 3 elements of my life less than 10%. And then other times I would have to readjust that based on what was going on. And I found you can't just salami slice it and divvy it up that way. You've really got to adjust the energy that you put into one of those elements of your life based on what's going on.
Right. I call it one of those iron triangles of painful trade-offs. They use that in contracting. I think cost, quality, and time. Pick 2 because you can't maximize all 3 of those. There's always a cost somewhere.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I learned that. I had a certification as a project management professional, and that's certainly one of the tenets of managing a project. As you just said, you've got to pick 2. You can't have all 3.
Or there's a friend of mine. He's in the ministry and a chaplain in the Army Reserves. He said trying to balance those responsibilities, sometimes like trying to canoe down through a rapids with 1 foot in 2 different canoes, and sometimes it stretches you in ways that make you uncomfortable. But
yeah. So you've got to manage your time, and really, there's an interesting book I read a while back. I can't remember the exact title of it, but basically what the author talked about is it's not about time management. It's about managing the energy that you put into things, and I think there's a lot to be said for that.
That might be one of the part of the 7 habits to the 7 habits of highly effective people, but working on those priorities and managing where you put that influence. Of course, it's interesting, isn't it? I was told once that grammatically that word priority is can only be singular. You can't have multiple priorities. That's
well, you could have multiple priorities, but you've got to understand that there could only be one number 1.
Oh, yes, sir. At any one time, which, as you said, and choosing where you need to focus at that moment. And that's really a conversation about then resilience in a way. Not so much bouncing back necessarily as being strong or staying strong to be fit for your various callings. And I think we overuse the term work-life balance in that way. In that really it's all intimately interconnected. So, sir, how have you managed all of that throughout your career, or been able to stay strong and make the right call for where you focus your time and energy?
Yeah, like I said, it's really based on what's going on the ground, and it's also understanding that really got to be focused on the things that you can control. There's certain things that are outside of our control, and you've got to try to be self-disciplined to not worry about trying to control things that are simply outside of your control. Gas prices, for example,
yes, sir.
Or the war in Ukraine right now. I mean, there's certain things, other geopolitical conditions that are occurring, even the weather. There's certain things we cannot control, so we've got to focus on the things we can control, and that I think is a good way to try to live one's life.
Oh, yes, sir. Well, and we do use the terms area of influence and area of operations, and you operate in your assigned area. We could compare that to any one of our callings or vocations as well. But certainly there are things that come from the outside, but you can only affect things within a certain area. And that's straight out of the 7 Habits too. That the idea that there are the things that concern us are much broader and more peripheral, but then applying ourselves where we actually do have that control.
No, absolutely.
Sir, and so you take the title of your most recent book, Iron-Sharpened Leadership, from Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens one person, or as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And you share the story, the genesis of that title, or how you where you picked that up when you were in a leadership position. What has iron-sharpened leadership come to mean for you, sir?
Yeah, to me, iron-sharpened leadership, and really what the message behind Proverbs 27:17 really means to me is, we've got to, as leaders, we've got to find ways to leave our comfort zone and to relate with people who are stronger than us, maybe more highly talented or developed in a certain area than we are, so we could sharpen ourselves against them and become stronger and more effective leaders. But then at the same token, we've also got to, look at other people who are perhaps a little bit less talented than we are, or less developed than we are. And we've got to help to develop others along the way too. So just as we have to look for people that we could sharpen ourselves against, we also have to, give of ourselves to help other people become sharper as well. So it's multifaceted there. It's not just about making ourselves sharper and stronger. It's about helping those we lead, and really helping anybody in general who reaches out to us, or that we reach down to try to help them become stronger too.
Yes, sir. Well, and you talk about servant leadership in the book, and really that's built into the Army values, the selfless service, and I think you talk about too that positions of leadership are never for the benefit of the leader. and the authority and the position and everything that goes along with that's bestowed on a leader is never for that individual leader, but for the sake of the organization and the individuals that are part of it, and or in the military for the sake of the mission. How did you come to understand servant leadership and that giving of yourself as a leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. It probably started with my family. Just the values as I was a young child. Growing up, having a sense of my father giving back to the community in which he lived, and being charitable and being generous and trying to help other people. And so I think that's where it all started. And then just based on books that I read and mentors that I had as I was a young aspiring leader, trying to develop those skills and realizing that as a leader, it's really incumbent on us to place the welfare of those we lead above and beyond our own welfare. And then there's this whole notion of ambition as well, and I believe that a leader shouldn't be ambitious for their own, potential future positions. They need to be ambitious for the benefit of the organization by which they're leading. So you've got to channel that ambition to be focused on helping the organization that you lead become better, rather than be worried about, hey, what is my next position? Just a quick story that I heard that I think is pretty cool. I heard, the story about a lieutenant talking to this general officer, and the second lieutenant was asking the general officer, hey sir, how do I become a general? And this general officer, kind of started talking about Army values and the importance of staying true to those Army values, the loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And, as the general, spoke about these things for about 10 minutes, he paused, and the second lieutenant looked at the general and he said, oh, so if I do all those things, I'll get promoted to general? And the general said, no. If you do all those things, you'll get promoted to first lieutenant. In other words, there is no silver bullet to gaining higher positions. You've really got to focus on the job at hand, do your best at the job at hand, and if you do well, things are going to take care of themselves, and you'll get promoted to the next rung in the ladder. And that's probably, I think that's the way I try to look at my career, and I think that's a healthy way to look at it.
There's no shortcut to wisdom, is there?
Not at all. It's all about paying dues and going through the experiences and education that we all need to develop to become a stronger leader, a stronger person.
And learning along the way and taking those lessons. There's a great story in a book. I read it in the book. I think it's Best Year Ever by Michael Hyatt. He's a man of faith as well, but he shares a story of Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski, in their 2015 championship run. And so at the time while we're recording this, Duke is still in the hunt for the national championship. But at the start of the 2015 March Madness, he took a basketball and he had his players write the names of people who had impacted them along the way and helped them get to where they were on the cusp of a championship. And each of the players and coaches wrote names on there, and they carried that basketball with them through the whole tournament, from the hotels to meals, etc. And then they ended up winning the championship. And when they won, they pulled that basketball out, and Coach K said, then, okay, now I want you to reach out to those people and let them know what their impact was on you and getting to this achievement. You talk about that, writing notes and keeping in touch with people and affirming and enabling people. What has that meant to you along the way, sir?
Yeah, I've had so many great mentors along the way, and all my mentors weren't necessarily older than me or at a higher level in terms of position authority than I was. And I am a firm believer, excuse me, I am a firm believer that mentorship is really 360 degrees. It's not only people that are, quote, your boss or in a position of authority above you that you can learn from. You can learn from your peers. You can learn from people who work for you, and you can learn from people who you lead. So I really think it's just a matter of being open-minded and actually looking for those opportunities where you could learn from other people. I speak about this in my book. In one chapter I talk about not everybody deserves a mentor. And by that I mean, if you're a closed-minded person and if you think you know everything, and if you're so arrogant you don't think you can learn anything anymore, you probably don't deserve a mentor, because you're going to be failing to see those mentorship opportunities that are all around us all the time. But you've got to open up your mind to those opportunities. You've got to open up, your eyes to those learning opportunities. So those who fail to do that don't deserve a mentor at all, because these opportunities are really all around us. We just got to look for it.
Oh, yes, sir. And avoid that hubris that would suggest that we've arrived and we've got nothing else to learn. I learned that in a seminary classroom. One of our professors said, "You will be formed, so choose wisely on who and what you let shape you."
No, absolutely. And I truly believe that when a leader stops learning because they think they know everything already, they stop growing, they actually start regressing. I mean, even in my career, retired from the Army now, and the various positions that I've been honored to hold, I'm still trying to develop myself to be a stronger leader. I'm still trying to learn how to be a better leader. So I think it's something we all have to continue to try to get better at. And I think it gets back to iron sharpens iron. Once you stop sharpening yourself, you're only going to get dull. So no matter how old you are or how experienced you are, you have to always find those ways to try to get a little bit sharper.
Oh, absolutely, sir. Sir, you talked about the potential for leaders or people to regress. Do you think that's responsible for some of the corrosive or toxic behaviors that we see within organizations or families or military units?
Yeah, I really think, and we've all seen it. You get to a high level in any organization, whether it be military, civilian, government, you name it. And some of these leaders that get to those higher levels of responsibility, do these things which are, just what you would think out of character for them. They have these character flaws, or issues, in terms of perhaps having an affair, or perhaps, stealing money or using power in an unjust way. And I think a lot of it has to do with complacency. And then opportunities that are around somebody where they don't pull themselves in check. So, if you get complacent again and think you know everything and think that you've arrived, as you said, there's that opportunity where you might drift a little bit in terms of what your values are. And the other thing is, if you don't have checks and balances, it's easy to drift. So I do think leaders, especially as leaders move higher and higher in an organization, they've got to ensure that there's checks and balances around them. So, maybe ask some trusted advisors, to really keep an eye on the way you've been behaving or the way you talk to people or the way you interact, and give them the permission to call you out on it if they see you perhaps going, off tangent to a degree. So there's certain things I think leaders need to do to help safeguard themselves from getting off track in terms of character issues and those type of things.
And certainly finding ways to keep that core strong, the core of your character. That's one of the things that I think has been a blessing of the Army's new FM 7-22 holistic health and fitness, which that nomenclature 7-22 used to be solely based on physical fitness, but now it's acknowledged the interplay of all of these various facets of fitness, from physical, mental fitness, sleep hygiene, diet, and of course they've given acknowledgement to the spiritual fitness.
Yeah, I just saw a short article come out about the Space Force and how the Space Force is really embracing this whole notion of wellness rather than what's the score on the PT test. And I talk a lot about resiliency. And when I talk about resiliency, I think one of the aspects of becoming more resilient is focusing on fitness, not just physical fitness, but mental fitness, emotional fitness, and spiritual fitness. And if you focus on all those elements of fitness, it'll help you become a more resilient person. I do think it's incumbent on a leader not only to focus on their own resiliency, but also to help the people that they lead to become more resilient as well. So I think leaders need to be well versed on various resiliency techniques so they could counsel people they lead and mentor people they lead and coach people they lead on various resiliency techniques to help everybody become more resilient, which ultimately helps the organization become a more resilient organization.
Yes, sir. And you mentioned earlier that you spent most of your career as a traditional guardsman. And so we understand or realize pretty quickly in leadership positions in the National Guard that we only have direct contact with our soldiers and airmen and others in the organization for 2 or 3 days per month, sometimes for longer stretches. But still, when we're there, we have to be ready. So how did you find ways to sharpen your own resilience and to communicate that in that dispersed environment, or when you don't have so much direct contact with people?
Yeah, I heard a pretty good quote a couple of weeks ago. In that quote, and I think it really applies to law enforcement and military professionals. And that quote is, "Stay ready, then you won't have to get ready." So I think it's really focusing on those elements of fitness that we talked about all the time. It's just not about, hey, I used to hate this in the Army when certain soldiers would say, "Oh, there's a PT test coming up in 2 months. Now I got to start getting in good physical shape." It's kind of like, what? That's something you need to focus on all the time. And the same with the mental fitness, the emotional fitness, the spiritual fitness. It's not just something you do now and then. It's something you develop into a lifestyle. And so I think if you could develop that lifestyle of being a well person, a balanced person, that's what it's all about. It's just not when a particular event is coming up, you decide to, quote, get ready for it. You gotta stay ready, because you never know. I think COVID this whole pandemic was a perfect example. You never know when a crisis like that is going to pop up. Or in our military lives, we never know when we're going to be called upon to go somewhere and perform, especially with the National Guard, with the civilian or with the military support to civilian authorities. You could be called up into Oregon National Guard or any National Guard, in a heartbeat if there's some type of man-made or natural disaster. So again, you've got to maintain that notion of staying ready, and that's what I always try to do in my life.
Yes, sir. And there's boy, that brought up a couple thoughts I've had. Now, readiness, resilience, those, in some sense, those are transitory states that it's hard to stay at peak readiness or at that hyper alertness all the time. But I think that one of the ways that you do stay ready and but not going over the edge of falling into despair or hyper alertness in a negative way is by living with a sense of hope and purpose. Understanding that even on your worst days, ultimately everything's going to be okay. Of course, that's the big idea for this podcast too, is that living and leading with hope is essential for not just life in the military, but across our entire lives and who we are and what we're called to do. Where do you find hope, sir?
Could you say that again, please?
Well, so where, sir, where do you to live and to lead with hope and not sort of veer too far into hyper alertness or hyper vigilance, or which could lead to despair if you're not hopeful that there's a better tomorrow possible or coming. How do you personally, sir? Where does your hope come from? How do you live and lead with hope?
Yeah, and I think you said the word before, which I'm a big believer in, is purpose. So from an individual perspective, it's real important to do some self-reflection and really identify what your life purpose is. And I struggled with this when I transitioned out of the military in 2019. I really kind of fell into a little bit of a mood of despair because I wasn't quite as busy as I had been and engaging with soldiers as I had been doing over in Europe. And I had to, just kind of step back a little bit and reflect and really identify, hey, what is my life purpose? Why am I here? And life purposes could change based on, different seasons of your life. But that is really, I think, a very important aspect of maintaining hope. To understand that, hey, I'm here for a reason that is much bigger than myself. And once you understand what that purpose and reason is, then you could stay motivated. And again, you don't have to be hyper vigilant, 24/7, because that's impossible. That's only going to burn you out. But you could bounce back. If you have an off day or an off couple of days, when you understand what your purpose is, it's much easier to get re-engaged. What would you need to get re-engaged with in order to stay on the right path? So I really think that sense of purposefulness is important. And then I think a leader needs to do that for an organization. Any leader, one of the most important things of a leader to do is provide that vision. We're in the military, we call it commander's intent. One of the most important elements of the commander's intent is purpose. And it's up to the leader to be able to create that shared vision, that shared purpose, and then consistently and continually communicate that out to members of the organization. Whether you're talking to 100 people, or you're talking to somebody one-on-one, whether you're sending an email, or you're doing a podcast like this, or whatever medium you're using to get your message out, the message has to be consistent and it has to be continual. And that's how you, I think, mold an organization to achieve the things that the collective body of that organization needs to achieve based on the shared vision.
Yes, sir. And I think that vision is inherently hopeful. always sort of cling to that description, from B.H. Liddell Hart, the British strategist around World War II, and observed that states wage war to create a better peace, or the whole reason that war happens is to create a better peace, and really, so that's the job of, or the role of the state and the role of leaders to is a better peace, which is inherently hopeful if we're striving to build for that. And that's the role of the leader, isn't it? That if we're not doing something, or if we're not doing the right things that are leading to a better tomorrow, not just for ourselves but for the organization and the world, then we're probably not doing the right things.
Yeah, Chaplain. Let me just continue on this whole notion of hope for a moment. And when I talk to people about resiliency, I tell them that I think one of the key elements of resiliency is positive energy. And when I talk about positive energy, I do talk about the need for a leader to be optimistic. And I like to define optimism as believing that tomorrow is going to be better than today. But along with optimism, it can't be just this Pollyannish view that tomorrow is going to be better than today. A leader has to develop an action plan that's believable to their followers, that really indicates that tomorrow is going to be better than today. So it's not just about saying it, it's about having a plan behind that. And it's got to be a plan that's believable to your followers. And then this whole notion of positive energy, again, something I like to say to people is, you shouldn't be the type of leader who brightens up every room when you leave it. You shouldn't be the type of leader who brightens up every room when you leave it. You should be the type of leader who brightens up the room when you enter it, So you need to be able to exude that positive energy. That's pragmatic and that people believe in. And you've got to be approachable, at times you've got to be a cheerleader for the organization. So all of those things factor into hope, factor into faith, and factor into developing a more resilient organization.
Yes, sir, and that's right in line. You talk about, or at least reference, positive psychology a little bit in the book too, in your most recent book, Iron-Sharpened Leadership. That within positive psychology, there's a subset called hope theory, and they identify two components of hope, or living with a hopeful orientation. Because you do have to believe that a better future is out there or possible, but then the two components are agency and pathway. So agency, right? I like the way you phrased it as an action plan. And that could be the pathway. So that will really an action plan has both of those elements, agency and pathway. That I can influence with all the things that I can't influence, I have control over something today, and there's a pathway to get there. Whether that's the infantry team leader who just says, follow me, that's our objective, or the executive leader of a large organization who's looking up and out from a strategic perspective to fulfill that vision, or to make that vision come to fruition.
Absolutely, and I think you have to be tenacious on the overall strategy and the overall vision, but flexible on the tactics to get there. Because the world changes, the environment changes, and sometimes you might have to go left instead of right. But that overarching strategy, that overarching vision, I think needs to be steady. While those tactics get there, you need to be adaptable on those.
Sir, I think you've shared some stories in your books and other podcasts too, that I think illustrate that. Any particular examples you could give? being tenacious with that vision as well as flexible.
I think, for example, when I commanded the brigade over in Iraq in 2005, 2006, when we first got there, our mission was to destroy, to destroy insurgents, to kill bad guys. And as we conducted operations there, we realized you can't kill yourself out of an insurgency. And so we changed our focus from killing the bad guys to protecting the populace. Now, to protect the populace, sometimes you still got to kill bad people or detain bad people. But it's that whole mindset that changed. And I thought that was an important shift that we made in our operations there. And really, the overarching purpose of us being over there, at least the overarching purpose that I conveyed to the brigade that I led, is that the reason we're over here in Ramadi, Iraq, is to keep our families and friends and all Americans safer back at home. So that was the overarching purpose. But the tactics of how we did that, whether it was killing insurgents or whether it was protecting the populace, that kind of shifted. So I think that's a pretty good example of the overarching purpose staying the same, but the tactics to do that changed.
And then not being afraid to recognize that what you're doing isn't working, and to shift gears to find another way to get there.
Yeah, and I talk a lot about decision making, and when a leader makes a decision, I say they can't just make the decision and kind of throw the sack of potatoes over the wall and then let other people carry that decision out. A leader has to stay connected to that decision, and as new information becomes available, or if you see the decision you made just isn't working out the way you thought it would work out, that leader has to be prepared to shift a little bit, shift course a little bit, and you have to be available to the people who you're expecting to carry out that decision. You have to be available to them in case they need a little bit more guidance, or in case they have some questions. You just can't throw the sack over the wall and walk away. You gotta stay connected to it.
No, it's not fire and forget. Well, that was another from the chapter you wrote on mentorship. You've already used one phrase that I've appropriated with proper attribution, but that mentorship is 360 degrees. I like that because I've used it with the context of our people first philosophy. That's 360 degrees, because then you also talk about it as a contact sport, and that
Yes.
You've got to gain and maintain contact.
Yeah, absolutely. If as a mentor, you've got it's a people business. It's all about relating to people. It's all about being approachable. And again, we gotta be careful when we say it's all about being approachable, because that might lead some people to believe that, hey, you're going to stand back and just wait for people to come to you. But no, that also means you going out and you engaging people proactively as well, to get to know people, to get to know what makes them tick, to get to understand their strengths and their weaknesses. You're going to only do that by engaging on a regular basis.
Well, yes, sir. I think you said you were an athlete too, and if you wait for your opponent to initiate contact, you could end up on your fourth point of contact. Sir, with your recent book too, with each of the lessons, the leadership lessons that you share at the end of every chapter, you have some actions that individuals can take, and you also share a spiritual component. Maybe a couple of questions about writing that book, and I want to be respectful of your time, but as we wrap it up, maybe where did that idea come from to or that recognition come from that there's a spiritual component to all of this, and how did you kind of put that into words in your book?
Yeah, I think, just generally, I'm a spiritual person. The title of the book itself, Iron-Sharpened Leadership, as we already talked about, is based on Proverbs 27:17. And I just felt that along with secular actions one could take, people should understand that there's a spiritual element of what we do. And I think the spiritual element is really more about, rather than being based on some type of organized religion, it's really being based on the whole concept of there's something going on in the universe that is much greater than ourselves, and we have to recognize that. And so I put those spiritual components in at the end of each chapter just to help people stay focused on that whole notion of, hey, we're a very small cog in the wheel, and we have to be cognizant of the fact of there's a big universe out there, and things that are going on in the universe we could affect, even though we're a small piece of it, and then the universe also affects us as well. So it's really just being just recognizing that concept.
Well, sir, again, thanks so much for your time today. Any parting thoughts on living and leading with hope?
I'll leave you with this. It's when, we have our heart, and some people have an unfulfilled heart, an empty heart, and other people, their heart is overflowing. And I think what we should all seek, and probably what everybody does seek, is a heart that's overflowing with love and hope and prosperity. And I think the way we fill our heart with love and hope and prosperity is by doing things for other people. So if our focus is on doing something for ourselves, that cannot fill that hole in our heart. But when we focus on doing things for other people, to help other people, to assist other people, that's how our heart begins to get filled. So I would just encourage all of us, whether you're in a leadership position or not, to really focus on doing good for other people in order to fill your heart up, and it'll lead to a more fulfilling life.
That's outstanding, sir. Thank you for sharing your heart and your thoughts with us. I could ask you 50 more questions. I pray that God would bless you and your family and your work today, tomorrow, and always.
Chaplain, thank you. It was great having this conversation with you, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
I'd love that, sir. Thank you. This podcast is produced by the Oregon National Guard Public Affairs Office. My prayer for you is that wherever you find yourself, that you might find hope for today and strength for the ambiguity and chaos of life. Blessings on the rest of your day.